Heartwarming moment, two Navy SEALs reveal corruption, incredible Admiral stands up in court. On a quiet afternoon in suburban Ohio, the sun cast a warm glow over manicured lawns, the smell of grilled burgers wafted through the air, and laughter echoed from backyard gatherings. Jake and Mark, two Navy SEALs in their mid-30s, found solace in the familiar ambience of Jake's family-owned bar. They were more than just soldiers, they were pillars of their community, reminders of the resilience and dedication that ran deep in the heartland. But on that fateful day, everything was about to change. As they sipped their beers, reminiscing about childhood baseball games and the values their families instilled in them, a conversation sparked. Jake leaned in, his voice low. "Did you hear about the changes at the Pentagon?" Mark shook his head, eyebrows furrowed. "What changes?" That's when Jake shared the scandal, a malicious military contract tied to their former commander, one who deep in celebrated, now residing in power. The betrayal hit like a punch to the gut. They exchanged shocked glances, faces pale as the weight of the revelations crashed over them. This wasn't just a story, it was a dagger aimed at the integrity they vowed to uphold. As the days rolled on, dread twisted in their stomachs. What would they do? Speak out against the corruption and risk their family's safety, or stay silent, letting the deceit fester? Their discussions grew heavier, echoing through the bar like a storm rumbling in the distance. Family loyalty weighed against honor. Mark ran a hand through his hair, distress etched on his face. "Our parents, our kids, it's all on the line." The thought led to silence, the kind that gnawed at their hearts. "Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As the trial approached, dread gave way to determination when Admiral Sam entered the picture. A guiding force in their lives, he stood for integrity, honor, and protecting their nation. Now, he stood ready to defend them, a lighthouse in the turbulent storm. Mark could almost hear the unwavering resolve in Sam's voice as he assured them they would not stand alone. With each passing moment, the community buzzed with fervor. They were a small town bound by loyalty, shaken by whispers of corruption. Neighbors gathered, exchanging glances of disbelief. The very man they once admired now cast a dark shadow. Murmurs filled the streets, voices debating what loyalty meant in the face of truth. As the trial loomed closer, tension spiraled. Jake and Mark, the proud warriors turned reluctant whistleblowers, felt their resolve harden. Yet, doubts clung heavily. Would their families bear the brunt of this fight? All eyes focused on Admiral Sam, as he prepared to face a courtroom that might define heroism not just for Jake and Mark, but for all who held honor dear. And in the climactic moment, as the gavel struck, silence enveloped them. Hearts raced, breaths held. What would the verdict be? Would truth conquer, or would betrayal snatch away everything they held dear? With the community holding its breath, the shadows of doubt loomed closer, leaving Jake and Mark teetering on the edge of their destiny, caught between the ideals they cherished and the harrowing cost of standing up. The silence that filled the courtroom felt suffocating. Jake's palms were slick against the cool wood of the bench. Each tick of the clock echoed like a drumbeat in his ears. Mark sat beside him, jaw clenched tight, eyes darting around the room, taking in every face. The community they had fought for, now watching their every move, held a mix of hope and fear. Admiral Sam stood at the front, his presence strong, his voice calm. "Today, we will expose the truth," he declared, his words cutting through the tension like a knife. The judge nodded, eyes serious, while the prosecutor shuffled papers, ready to unleash a barrage of questions. Jake felt a chill wash over him. What if they weren't believed? What if this whole thing was for nothing? As Admiral Sam began to present his case, detailing the intricacies of the corruption called to light by Jake and Mark, those thoughts twisted in his heart. He could almost hear their families' laughter fading away, replaced by uncertainty. "I know these two men," Admiral Sam said, his voice unwavering. "They are not just soldiers, they embody the values we hold dear." And there it was. Jake's chest warmed at the reassurance. The townsfolk, the very people who'd seen him grow from a boy into a man, were leaning in. They believed. But then came the defense. The former commander's attorney launched a counterattack, painting Jake and Mark as reckless. What they've done is driven by personal vendetta, a betrayal of those in their ranks. The word stung, cutting deep. Every accusation felt like a direct blow to their integrity. Mark tensed. "They're turning this on us," he whispered, no longer able to mask the tension in his voice. "I know," Jake replied, adrenaline surging through him. "We can't let this go unanswered. We have to show them the truth." With the defense's remarks echoing in his mind, Jake stood up. It felt like jumping off a high dive, terrifying but necessary. He could feel every eye in the room on him. Taking a deep breath, he spoke. "We did this not for ourselves, but for our families and for every man and woman who wears this uniform." The courtroom fell silent. The judge raised an eyebrow, intrigued. The community leant forward, absorbing his words. When you give your life to serve, you trust that the chain of command is as honorable as you are. Finding out that this trust was betrayed has driven us to seek justice, not just for us, but for everyone who believes in what we stand for. The impact of his words hung in the air. Jake felt a surge of energy, perhaps the very thing they needed to push through the storm. The jury exchanged glances, seeming to register the weight of his declaration. After what felt like an eternity, the judge called for a brief recess. The atmosphere was electric, the tension spilling over as members of the community murmured amongst themselves, many openly supporting Jake and Mark. Outside the courtroom, whispers buzzed with a mix of hope and anxiety. Had that really made a difference? Was the tide turning? But doubt still lingered, like a storm cloud overhead threatening rain. They had taken a stand, but what would be the repercussions? Jake turned to Mark, who was deep in thought. "Whatever happens, we just have to stay strong. For our families." As they took their seats again, the air grew thick with anticipation. The gavel struck again, and the courtroom was enveloped in a silence that felt almost palpable. What awaited them on the other side of this moment? Jake couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that even if justice was served today, the fallout would still be overwhelming. They were just soldiers, but today they had transformed into something much more, men willing to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. And as the defense began their next line of attack, Jake's heart pounded not just with fear, but with a newfound determination. What lay ahead would test their resolve like never before. Would they withstand the storm, or would it wash away everything they loved? In that moment, one thought blazed through his mind: they were just getting started. The gavel struck once more, reverberating through the silence, and Jake felt the weight of the moment press down harder than before. The defense attorney, sharp-eyed and relentless, stood poised, preparing to slice apart their fragile momentum. "Let us remember," the attorney said, voice slick and assessing, "these men claim to be heroes. But heroes don't bring disgrace to their ranks. They don't slander their own for personal gain." Jake clenched his fists, each accusation clawing at his chest. He glanced at Mark, who was visibly shaking with barely contained rage. They had sacrificed so much. This wasn't just a trial, it was a battle for everything they held precious. "Objection," Admiral Sam interjected, rising from his seat with authority. "These men didn't slander anyone. They raised their voices because they love their country, not out of a desire for revenge." His gaze swept across the jury, compelling and sincere. The defense attorney smirked. "Ah, but loving one's country doesn't excuse them from the consequences of their actions, does it?" Jake could feel the tension in the room simmer like a pot on the edge of boiling. He wanted to scream, to shut down the narrative that painted them as traitors instead of truth-seekers. He remembered the faces of their families, the smiles, the support they had shown. It was all at stake. "Jake," Mark whispered, breaking through the haze of blurred thoughts. "We need to counter this. What more can we do?" Jake's heart raced, words swirling, desperate to shape the chaos swirling in his mind. "We share our truth, our story," he replied, a flicker of hope igniting within him. "We show them why this matters." As the defense continued, spewing half-truths with an intensity that felt like a hurricane, Jake found himself standing again. This time, it felt more natural. He shaped his words carefully, knowing that every syllable counted. "When we serve, we put our lives on the line, trusting in the integrity of our leader's integrity." Interrupted the defense attorney, almost laughing. "You speak of integrity when you yourself stand accused of breaching that trust." "I'm speaking of the very thing we fought for." Jake shot back, grounding himself with all the strength he could muster. "We exposed a system that would have let corruption fester in the shadows. We did it for our brothers and sisters in arms who were too afraid to speak up." Again, silence engulfed the room, but this time it felt different. Jake could see attentiveness replace skepticism on the faces of the jury, could sense the shift. Hope was tangible, hanging in the air. He pressed on, his voice steady, filled with conviction. "I refuse to let fear dictate what is right. Fear kept many from speaking, but that ends today. It's time we reclaim our honor." Mark stood beside him, a solid presence, his eyes reflecting the same determination. The community watching had shifted, their whispers now filled with encouragement. "What does honor mean to you?" The defense attorney sneered, a hint of desperation creeping into his tone. "To be proud of who you are," Jake said, the truth of his words sharp and resonant. "To defend those who can't defend themselves. To demand truth even if it terrifies everyone involved." Slowly, he looked around the courtroom. He met the eyes of the community's faces, saw the supporters behind him, felt the energy surging. Together, they were stronger. Together, they could face whatever storm was brewing ahead. As the judge called for another recess, Jake felt both elation and fear spiral within him. The tide had shifted, but would it be enough to sustain their cause? As he turned back towards Mark, resolve in his heart, he realized this was only the beginning. The next word spoken could either empower their stand or crush their hopes entirely. What awaited them was uncertain, but as they prepared for the next round, one thought echoed within him: it was time to reveal the ultimate truth. Would they be ready for the consequences of standing up? The air buzzed with a mix of apprehension and determination as the gathered crowd settled back into their seats. Jake could feel the heat radiating from bodies around him, a palpable energy building. He returned his focus to the front, where the judge sat, looking like a sentinel over a battlefield. Mark stood beside him, breathing steadier now, their silent communication battling the nerves that had once bound them. As the judge's gavel fell again, sounding the start of the next session, the defense attorney seemed prepared for blood. The man exuded confidence, flipping through his notes like a conductor gearing up for a final act. Jake took a deep breath. This is it, he thought, his palms slick against his trousers. Now was the time to solidify their purpose and share the truth that had kept them awake at night. Let us continue, the judge prompted, settling the room once more. The defense attorney leaned in, eyes narrowing. What you call bravery, I call insubordination. You think this is a crusade for justice, but what were you aiming to achieve? You risked lives. What does that say about you? Jake felt the fire in his belly, igniting as he stood up again, his voice rising. It says we care. We care about those who fought alongside us. We care about our families and the very fabric of this nation. Ignoring corruption doesn't protect lives, it endangers them. A murmur swept through the crowd, families clenching hands, eyes wide. Jake found his footing in that shared sentiment. This wasn't just about them anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. The attorney grinned slyly. And what good did your so-called exposure do? You've invited scrutiny upon yourselves, upon your families. Do you think you can still call yourselves heroes? Mark took a step forward, his fury now a palpable force. We're not pretending to be heroes. We are standing tall against those who hide in the dark. We've exposed the truth one the higher powers tried to bury. We gave a voice to the voiceless. The jury listened more intently now, visibly torn. Whispers trickled among them. Jake looked at each face, searching for signs of understanding, for empathy. In those moments, he realized that their struggle wasn't just for their own freedom, it was for everyone else's right to speak up, to be heard, especially in a world where fear stifles truth. Suddenly, Jake felt a surge of solidarity as Admiral Sam stood tall behind them. This is our military. Built on honor, integrity, and the courage to stand up against corruption. These men did not act out of spite, they acted to protect the values we all swore to uphold. The defense attorney's smirk faltered, and Jake could see a shift in the dynamics. Admiral Sam's presence felt monumental, he fused their fight with the weight of authority, both military and ethical. Your Honor, the Admiral continued, addressing the judge, these men revealed a cancer within our ranks. They acted when many chose silence. Isn't the truth worth fighting for? A heavy silence followed, one that seemed to stretch on forever. Jake's heart raced, every moment like a drumbeat in his chest. The judge's expression remained unreadable, but the tension had shifted the air. Was it fear? Respect? A realization of what was truly at stake? Jake couldn't tell, but he felt hope surge within him, buoying his spirits. Let's take a brief recess, the judge finally declared, cutting through the suspense. As the murmurs rose again, Jake turned to Mark, who clutched his arm tightly. They had formed a bond that was thicker than blood, each realizing how much they had to lose. Do you think they're understanding? Mark asked, his voice trembling slightly. I hope so, Jake said with a mix of fear and bravery. But there's still a long way to go. We need to be ready for any backlash. As they walked toward the exit, Jake's mind spun with the weight of what lay ahead. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a fight for their names. It was crafting a legacy, one that would resonate far beyond the walls of this courtroom. But what if the truth that they had to reveal was more dangerous than they ever anticipated? The recess felt endless. Jake leaned against the cool wall outside the courtroom, trying to steady his racing heart. The weight of what they were fighting for pressed heavily against his chest. He looked over at Mark, whose brows were knitted with concern. I can't stop thinking about our families, Jake admitted, his voice a whisper. They didn't sign up for this. Mark nodded, his expression solemn. I know. But if we back down now, it's like admitting we were wrong to speak up. They deserve to know the truth. Their eyes locked, and Jake felt that unspoken bond between them, an understanding that transcended words. The sound of footsteps interrupted their moment. It was Admiral Sam, his face lined with resolve. He approached them, and Jake stood straighter out of respect. What you did in there was powerful, the Admiral said. You showed courage, but remember, the fight isn't over. We have to gather our strength, the real battle is yet to come. Jake couldn't help but feel a swell of admiration. Here was a man who had seen more conflict than most could imagine, yet he still believed in the fight for honesty and justice. But what if the jury doesn't see it the way we do? Mark asked, voice wavering slightly. The Admiral laid a reassuring hand on Mark's shoulder. Sometimes, it takes time for the truth to sink in. Stay focused on your mission. Let their doubts fuel your fire. As they returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere inside felt dense, charged with anticipation. The jury whispered among themselves, casting glances their way. Jake's stomach twisted. He caught glimpses of families, worried eyes on him and Mark. How would they hold up when things got tough? The judge took his seat once more, and the gavel struck, bringing a hush over the crowd. Jake felt a collective breath held tightly in the room as the judge addressed the jury. We will now continue with the proceedings. The stakes are high, but I remind you to keep an open mind. The defense attorney wasted no time in digging his claws back in. Ladies and gentlemen, let us not be swayed by theatrics, he began, his gaze cold and calculating. These men claim to expose corruption, yet they've brought chaos into a system built on order and loyalty. What will that do for our military? For our families? Jake's heart pounded in his chest. This was the moment of truth, their truth. He stepped forward. Your Honor, may I address the jury? He straightened his back, determination igniting within him. The judge nodded, and the murmur in the room faltered as he faced the jury. I understand that what we did was deemed risky. But sometimes, the most dangerous thing of all is silence. Our actions were aimed to protect not just our brothers, but the integrity of our nation. If we let fear guide us, it's the innocent who suffer. A ripple of murmurs coursed through the jury. Some faces softened, brows unfurrowing. Jake's heart raced, yet he pressed on, refusing to back down. We're asking you to see beyond the chaos to the truth that lies beneath. We are not seeking glory. We're seeking accountability. And then, silence fell, deep and heavy. Jake could see it in their eyes, they were leaning in, perhaps beginning to understand. Every voice matters, especially in the darkest times, he added, his voice steady now. If we fail to speak, we become complicit. We can no longer afford to be quiet. He returned to his seat, heart racing. Jake exchanged a glance with Mark, both men feeling a flicker of hope. But just then, the defense attorney stood to counter, determination burning in his eyes. But what if I show you that your bravery was nothing but naive recklessness? The tension surged back into the room, thickening the air. Jake's stomach twisted, bracing for the fight ahead. Would their truth withstand the scrutiny? And as the attorney prepared to unleash his next move, Jake wondered again, what would this really cost them? Would they emerge victorious, or would the fallout bring devastation to everything they held dear? The defense attorney's voice rang out, cold and calculated, cutting through the charged atmosphere. Let us examine the motivations of these men, he began, stepping closer to the jury. If we peel back the layers, what do we truly find? Individuals pushing their own agendas, cloaked in the garb of patriotism. This isn't about justice, it's about self-preservation. Let me remind you of what could happen if we allow rebellion to flourish. Jake felt his heart sink. He could see doubt creeping into the eyes of some jurors, a flicker of uncertainty just waiting to be fanned into flames. This was the moment when they could either gain ground or lose everything. His grip on the edge of the table tightened. He had to do something, to spin this back in their favor. With every ounce of strength, he stood up again. Your Honor, I would like to respond, he said, moving forward. As he spoke, he remembered the faces of his family, the weight of their trust resting on his shoulders. Rebellion? He echoed, his voice steady but full of fervor. That's not what this is about. We signed up to serve our country, to protect it from threats both outside and within. When loyalty turns blind, isn't that when we become the very thing we fight against? The defense attorney smirked, unyielding. And what about your families, Sergeant? Are you willing to put them in the crosshairs of your reckless actions? Jake faltered for a moment, the attorney's words striking a nerve. He stole a glance at Mark, who was watching him intently, willing him to keep going. This isn't reckless, he finally said, his voice growing with conviction. It's courageous. We're standing up for our fellow servicemen and women. We're saying, enough is enough. We want a military that defends freedom, not one that hides behind secrets. The words hung in the air, and Jake could feel the slight momentum shift in his direction. There was a fire in his belly, unyielding. He needed them to see the truth, to root for the resilient spirit of those who challenged folly in the name of justice. Think about what's at stake here, Jake continued, his gaze sweeping over the jury. This isn't just about us. It's about future generations who will fight for this country. Do we want them to grow up knowing that silence and allegiance to wrongdoing is the price of patriotism? He stepped back, panting slightly from the intensity of his emotions but feeling a hard-fought spark of hope stirring within him. Mark shot him a look, and Jake could see that the insecurities were fading. They both understood their families were intertwined in this struggle. The tension thickened again, the defense attorney shifting tactics, ready to hit back. But something felt different. The jury was shifting, too, faces were harder to read, but Jake could sense an openness, a willingness to consider their plea. Then a juror, a woman with thoughtful eyes, raised her hand. "Could you tell us more about why you felt compelled to act, despite the risks?" she asked, bringing a pin-drop silence to the proceedings. Jake felt a swell of gratitude. "It's simple," he responded, "we couldn't do nothing. Our families raised us better. They taught us to stand for what's right, even when it feels impossible. This isn't just our fight, it's for them, for every family that sacrifices so much." A subdued murmur rippled through the jury, and Jake's heart leaped. Perhaps they were understanding, perhaps their sacrifice would spark something stronger. He caught a glimpse of Admiral Sam, standing slightly behind them with an almost paternal pride etched on his face, but just before he could breathe a sigh of relief, the defense attorney interjected sharply, "You're putting your convictions above the safety of your families. What if your insistence triggers rules that put them in jeopardy?" Jake's blood ran cold for a second. The attorney was right in a way, there were real and serious repercussions for speaking out. But then memories flooded his mind, laughter shared around the dinner table, the pride in his daughter's eyes at school plays, warmth wrapping around him like a blanket every time he returned home. He took a deep breath, squeezed his eyes shut for a second, and reopened them, resolve hardening. If they didn't fight for this, nothing would change. "Risk is part of life, part of service," he declared. "Staying silent is the true danger. We're all in this together. And as long as I have breath, I will not back down. I'll fight for my family, my friends, and for what's right." The weight of those words hung powerfully in the air, propelling Jake forward with strength he never knew he had. The courtroom buzzed with whispered exchanges, some jurors nodding slowly as if they were digesting the toughest truths, but the defense attorney wasn't done yet. "Then we'll see how far that conviction takes you. Will your children sleep soundly knowing their father may bring ruination upon them?" Jake felt as if he had been punched in the gut. The air in the room changed, like a storm brewing in the distance, dark clouds gathering overhead. The stakes had just risen, and he could hardly catch his breath. What price would they ultimately pay? Would they stand as heroes or find themselves crumpling under the weight of their own convictions? Jake's mind raced as he looked around at everyone, wondering how far they were willing to go. Would they let fear seep back in or turn it into something stronger? And in that moment of uncertainty, the next move from the defense loomed just ahead, a storm on the horizon. Jake could feel his pulse racing as the tension spiraled around him. The defense attorney's voice echoed in his mind, twisting like a knife. Could he handle the weight of ruining his family's safety? It felt suffocating, like he was standing in shallow water but being dragged deeper. He glanced at the faces of the jurors, each one a soul waiting to be swayed, and then at Mark. They were in this together, but doubt clouded his thoughts. Mark stepped forward, his eyes fierce. "You know, we have to ask ourselves, what are we really afraid of?" His voice rang out, cutting through the atmosphere as he continued. "Is it our actions or the truth we're trying to hide? Each of you sitting here has faced your own battles, and we're not asking you to fight for us but to believe in what we're standing for." A murmur ran through the room, and the jury's attention peaked. Even the defense attorney paused, momentarily caught off guard. It was a glimmer of hope for Jake. He could see the jurors shifting, their expressions softening. But then came the voice again, heavy with skepticism. "And what happens when your actions lead to chaos? What if this rebellion breeds more instability?" Jake's stomach twisted. It was a fair point. The reality of rebellion could lead to devastating storms. But what kind of chaos was acceptable? He took a deep breath, searching for the right words. Sometimes stability comes from shaking things up, Jake managed, glancing at the jury earnestly. If we stand by and let wrong persist, isn't that the true chaos? I'm not asking for blind loyalty, just for the willingness to question what's right. There was an electric pause, and he could feel the shift again, the curiosity thickening in the air. Each of the jurors wrestled silently with their own thoughts. In that moment, Jake saw a chance to connect, to break down the walls. Imagine if you were in our position, he said, his hands gesturing as if painting a picture. You're enlisted to protect your country, but what happens when your country turns against you? We're not fighting for the sake of rebellion. We fight for accountability, for honor. Isn't that what our military is founded on? A ripple of understanding crossed the jury. Even the woman who had asked him earlier, she nodded slightly. Jake continued, fueled by the momentum. Look at the families we have. Mine, yours. Are we not all equal in wanting a future free from fear? We stand for each other, and together, we create a foundation that will allow our children to thrive. Jake's heart soared. In that instant, he saw the fire ignite in some of the jurors' eyes, a recognition dawning. They were no longer just faces, but people grappling with their own values and fears. Then, as if fate had decided to intervene, Admiral Sam stepped forward, placing a hand on the table. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, his voice rang out, steady and strong. This isn't just about these men. This is about principles that define our very existence. I've had the privilege of serving alongside these brave individuals. Their courage isn't just a plea, it's a call for the integrity that we should all stand by. Surprise swept through the courtroom. Admirals didn't usually involve themselves in messy affairs like this, but here he was, bridging the gap in a way that felt natural and profound. Jake could hardly breathe as Sam spoke, the weight of responsibility lifting. This was the support they needed, the voice that could magnify their cause. Then, as Sam continued, the room filled with a renewed energy. Let us not forget that our deepest values lie in our ability to question and adapt, Admiral Sam continued, his demeanor unwavering. We owe it to our children, to their futures, to ensure the military we serve embodies the freedom and rights they'll inherit. Jake glanced at Mark, their eyes locking in a moment of shared understanding. This was more than just a courtroom battle, it was a collective reckoning, a moment of awakening for everyone involved. As the defense attorney prepared to fire back with criticisms that felt increasingly futile, Jake sensed an undercurrent of possibility. Maybe they could turn this ship around. But there was more to fight for, already brewing in the depths of the murky water. Your Honor, the defense attorney cleared his throat, let us not be swayed by theatrics. The reality of this situation could be far grimmer. Aren't we making the safety of our nation vulnerable as we navigate uncharted waters? Jake's pulse quickened again. The storm was definitely on the horizon. With each passing moment, the intensity of the battle swelled, and Jake knew that everything hinged on the next few exchanges. Would they rise above the murky shadows of doubt, or would they drown in them? What would it take for the truth to shine through? The tension in the courtroom thickened like fog, each word hanging in the air, ripe with meaning. Jake's heart raced, not just from the uncertainty of the outcome but from the sheer weight of the moment. He could see Admiral Sam's unwavering focus. It was as if the man became the lighthouse guiding them through an impending storm. Then the defense attorney launched into a counterattack with such ferocity that it made the jurors shift uncomfortably in their seats. This isn't a moral crusade, he argued. This is a reckless pursuit that threatens our core values. His words were blistering, aimed like arrows at Sam, Jake, and Mark. Do you think you're the brave souls in a fairy tale? The leaders you claim to challenge? They've dedicated their lives to protect you, all while you seek to bring them down. How does that protect your own families? That last jab hung in the air like an anvil. Jake watched as some jurors furrowed their brows, eyes darting among each other. That doubt, that unsettling questioning, began to creep in again. Would they believe him? Would they believe in the fight, but that spark of determination swirled inside Jake again. He stood, driven by a force larger than himself. "I know how it feels to believe in something larger than life," he said, his voice steady, each word deliberate. "When you've risked it all, and it feels pointless, everything feels like it's coming undone. But this isn't just about us. This is about a legacy. It's about ensuring that our children inherit a world where honesty prevails over greed." A silence fell, a whisper of contemplation sweeping through the jury box. Mark moved behind Jake, hands poised to give strength, to push them just a bit more in the right direction. Jake felt a swell of energy. The battle wasn't lost yet. We signed up to protect our country, and sometimes that means fighting against those who misuse their power. Our actions are not treasonous. They're a call to arms for justice. Mark took a breath, stepping forward beside Jake. "We're asking you, the jurors, to join us in this quest. History will remember this day, and the decision you make here. Will we side with fear, or will we stand for what is right? Each one of you holds the power to create change." The atmosphere shifted again, palpable. Some jurors leaned in, their expressions softening, understanding beginning to bloom where skepticism had once firmly entrenched itself. Admiral Sam resumed, his voice soothing but firm. "You've seen leaders stand intrepid amidst chaos. You know that those who speak for the silenced should be given hope, not condemnation. We need you to remember that the heart of our nation beats strong through the actions we take each day." Just as Jake felt the tide turning, the defense attorney pounced again. "And what's next? A movement for anarchy? A call to arms against all authority? What will that mean for your families?" Rattled, some jurors exchanged glances. It was like watching a match flicker in and out, a flame barely holding on. Jake felt a prickle of panic but clamped down hard. This was the moment to dig deeper. "No. We're fighting for the very authority we serve. For a system that holds everyone accountable. That is brave." He shouted, his heart pounding against his ribs, but his voice echoing through the room. A sudden silence washed over the courtroom. Everyone, jurors and spectators alike, held their breath. It felt electric, the weight of their decision looming over them. What would they choose? Just then, something unexpected happened. A juror, an older man with kind eyes, raised a hand slowly. "You've made a passionate argument, son," he said. "But how do we know your fight isn't just a facade for something darker? What proof do you have?" Jake's breath hitched. This was at the essence of the battle. Trust. The word broke from his lips, raw and unabashed. Trust is a choice. We're standing here, bare, stripped of any pretense. It's vulnerable, I admit, but every great transformation begins with trust. As tension dissolved, an unexpected sense of vulnerability washed over the courtroom. Each person could sense the weight of his plea. Unbeknownst to Jake, those words had cracked open the hard shell of fear, leaving a trembling hope in their wake, but just as Jake felt the swell of possibility, an unexpected voice broke the silence again, cutting like glass. "And what if that trust is misplaced?" A young woman on the jury whispered. Her brows furrowed, eyes searching. "What happens then?" Jake's heart sank. Doubts, however minor, could still become deafening roars. With thunder claps of determination building inside him, he knew the fight was far from over. Behind him, he felt the presence of Mark and Admiral Sam, a steadfast reminder that the battle was still very much alive. The weight of his answer hung imminent in the air, carrying with it the fate of not just their case, but perhaps a future they were desperate to ignite. How would they respond to that haunting question? Would they find strength among the shadows of doubt, or would fear drown their chance for a new beginning? Jake felt the temperature in the courtroom drop as eyes shifted to him, waiting for an answer. He could sense the heaviness of doubt still hanging in the air, as uncertain as a storm. The question from the juror lingered like the scent of smoke after a fire, reminding everyone of the risks they were taking by placing their trust in him and his team. Misplaced trust can lead to a bitter fall, he started slowly, his voice steadying. But think of the trust we already have: trust in each other, in our families, in the very foundations of this judicial system. Don't let the fear of what may go wrong blind you to the possibility of what can go right. He glanced towards the jurors, their faces a canvas of concern. One woman, her brow furrowed, sat with her hands clasped tightly on her lap. A man, perhaps in his 40s, tapped his fingers nervously against the table. Jake knew their minds were racing, grappling with the implications of their decision. What we're fighting against is so much bigger than each of us, he continued, desperate to ignite that flickering flame of hope. We're standing here because we believe that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the determination to face it head-on. If we shatter the trust to uphold our values, what does that say about the ideals we've sworn to protect? The silence in the courtroom felt electric. The air thickened, filled with collective breaths held tight. Mark took a small step closer, echoing Jake's sentiments. This is about accountability. It's about ensuring that the sacrifices we made and the lives lost aren't forgotten. We owe it to everyone who believed in the mission. His voice carried a steady resolve, and Jake felt a current of solidarity swell between them. Jake turned back to the jurors, determination flooding his veins. You have the power to rewrite a narrative that has been dictated by fear and complacency. Instead of becoming pawns in a game of bureaucracy, you can choose to be warriors of truth. He paused, committing each gaze, each face to memory. Imagine a world where your children wake up knowing they are safe, not just because of the uniforms we wear, but because of the justice that lives within each of us. Gradually, some jurors began to nod, their expressions shifting. The older man with kind eyes seemed the most contemplative, his gaze drifting off as if he were contemplating an avalanche of thoughts crashing through the weight of his decision. The defense attorney, sensing the tide moving, jumped in again. Words mean nothing. Action is what's real. If you want to believe their promises, what guarantee do you have that they won't betray you? What proof exists that they're not merely playing you for their own gain? The courtroom spun back towards Jake, and he felt the tightening knot of pressure. That's the thing about trust, Jake said, almost breathlessly. It's about courage and vulnerability. He glanced briefly at Admiral Sam before continuing, our fight isn't based on power plays or deceit. It's a fight to lift the veil, to shine a light where shadows linger, and yes, sometimes we might stumble. But together, we can be both the bridge and the beacon of hope. Jake's heart thundered in his chest. Each second dragged, every silence felt agonizingly drawn out as the jury absorbed his words. Then another juror, a woman with gentle features, spoke up, but what if we believe you, and everything collapses? What then? Living in uncertainty, fear of a potential collapse could paralyze a person, a group. Jake recognized that sentiment all too well. Living a life without risk is no life at all, he responded, his voice rising with passion. Every day, we take risks. It's how we grow, how we learn, how we thrive, and how we decide to trust again, even when the past bears heavy wounds. Just then, a flicker of resolve illuminated the eyes of the kind-eyed man. I think I understand, he began, but before he could continue, the gavel slammed down. The judge raised an eyebrow, the sound echoing through the hushed courtroom like a gunshot. Order! He declared. We are not here to debate philosophy. We are here to discern the truth before us. The enormity of the moment sparked a current of urgency. Jake felt dialed in, ready to engage the heart of the storm that was brewing. But just as he gathered his strength to respond, the old man locked eyes with him one last time and said, how can we truly trust, when even our own have failed us? The last question hung in the air, laden with doubt and possibility. Jake took a deep breath, standing on the brink of revelation, knowing the answer was key to unlocking their decision. How would he bridge the chasm of skepticism that loomed before him? Would he be able to transform their uncertainty into the very trust they needed to prevail? In that moment, Jake knelt on the precipice of truth. That question is the heart of our fight, he said, his voice steady and resonant. Trust has been broken, but it can be rebuilt. It starts here, today, in this courtroom. The past might be filled with betrayal, but it doesn't define our future. Silent glances exchanged across the aisle, each juror caught in a web of contemplation. The atmosphere crackled with energy, a palpable shift as uncertainty began to melt away, giving way to understanding. Jake pressed on, feeling the weight of duty push him forward. We need to acknowledge the darkness, yes. But we must also be willing to illuminate the path ahead. We want to lead by example, to show that integrity can prevail. The older juror, his eyes now glimmering with a new realization, leaned slightly forward. But isn't that a gamble? What if the tides turn, and all this courage brings ruin? Jake took a deep breath, knowing that this battle was about more than just words, it was about the community they loved, their families waiting back home. Life is a gamble, he declared. Every day we risk something to protect what we hold dear. We wear the uniform and put our lives on the line, stand shoulder to shoulder with our brothers and sisters. Trust is dangerous, but not as dangerous as complacency. If we don't act, we let those who betray us win. Mark stepped beside him, his expression matching Jake's resolve. Change is never easy, but it is necessary. You have the chance here, the chance to decide what kind of legacy you want to be part of. A legacy that upholds the values we stand for, or one that hides behind deafening silence. The jury seemed to breathe as one, their collective deliberation resonating through the room. The energy shifted, doubt still lingered, but now it felt like a shared burden instead of a barrier. The courtroom murmured softly, and Jake could see hope flicker in the eyes of some jurors. They were beginning to see the message buried beneath the chaos. Admiral Sam spoke next, his steady presence a testament to their unity. Integrity, honor, accountability, these aren't just empty words. They form the foundation of our mission. We've always carried the burden of truth. When those in power falter, it falls upon us, to speak and uphold the essence of our nation. The defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, his smugness faltering as certain jurors exchanged decisive glances. Jake's heart raced. Could they really be shifting towards the truth? The judge, sensing the pulsing intensity in the room, called for order. Members of the jury, I urge you to weigh what has been presented. Trust isn't blind, nor should justice be. After a tense pause, he added, it is your duty to assess the facts based on integrity, regardless of past grievances. Jake felt the swell of emotion battery within him. Action and consequence hung heavy in the air, deserving of their full attention. As the jury began to deliberate, Jake and Mark exchanged a glance filled with uncertainty and hope. After moments that stretched out like hours, the foreperson stood. Your Honor, she said, her voice trembling. We, the jury, have reached a decision. Jake's heart hammered fiercely, adrenaline coursing through him as every ear strained to catch her words. We find the defendants not guilty of all charges. A rush of emotion hit Jake like a tidal wave. He covered his mouth, eyes wide, tears spilling over as relief washed over him. He turned to Mark, who was in shock, a wide smile breaking through. Admiral Sam's face shone with visible pride, standing tall as the realization settled in. Slowly, applause erupted in the courtroom, a mix of cheers and tears filling the air. The community they had fought for was behind them, words of courage and justice echoing between their seats. As families embraced, Jake felt a warmth of gratitude light through his heart. We did it, he whispered, his voice shaking. Mark nodded, tears of joy running down his face. For them, he said, motioning to the people smiling, filled with renewed hope. But as the rejoicing continued, Jake caught the judge's eye. The man nodded subtly, and in that moment, Jake understood the struggle had ignited something larger. They hadn't just won a trial, they had sparked a movement toward transparency and justice within their military. They had chosen truth over fear, and something beautiful had begun to emerge from the ashes of doubt. Jake looked around the room, and in the faces of the people he loved, he saw unity and unwavering belief that in all their hearts, they were one, that the fight wasn't over. But now, Armed with a community that believed in them and the strength of their truth, Jake felt ready to take on whatever came next, together. This was just the beginning of their journey, an affirmation of transformation and perseverance. As the courtroom door flung open, laughter and joy spilling out into the world, they stepped forth, ready to inspire monumental change. Now it's your turn. Don't sit on the sidelines. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help us grow. Comment your reactions and feelings about this incredible ending. Share this video instantly with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformation. True fans understand the importance of supporting the channel. Don't wait not even one more second to share. Let us lift each other up and keep the momentum going.